work. The rules would restrict your children or grandchildren or neighbors from working on a farm or ranch and doing chores like rounding up cattle on horseback or driving a tractor or using a battery-powered screwdriver. The Labor Department says the changes are necessary because current farm practices are really putting kids' lives in danger. Senator Jerry Moran of Kansas has introduced legislation to stop the Labor Department from implementing this regulation. We're going to talk to the senator in just a moment. But first, we're going to speak with Norma Flores Lopez. She's the director of the Children in the Fields campaign at the Association of Farm Worker Opportunity Programs. She's also a former child farm worker. And Norma, let's start there. What kind of farm work did you do as a kid?
As a kid, I got to do a number of different crops, anything from asparagus fields to onion fields and even corn fields, doing some detasseling. My family and I got to travel up north doing it in different states like Indiana, Michigan, Iowa. So
Norma, kids have been working on farms for decades and decades. So why now? Why do you think these restrictions are necessary now?
Well, these rules have not been updated in over 40 years. Just last year, the Department of Labor updated the hazardous orders for non-agricultural work. So it was a natural progression for them to take a look at the farms, especially because there are so many kids that are getting hurt and even dying out there in those farms.
So many kids, like how many?
Well, NIOSH reports that between 1995 and 2002, 907 kids died on farms. So that's well over 100 preventable deaths each year.
Do they compare that to other type of work that kids do?
Well, we do know that agriculture is one of the most dangerous industries. It's right up there with construction and mining. That's for everybody. And yet we don't allow for children to be out there in those other two industries, but we continue to allow children to be out there in agriculture.
Some suggest regulations like this are a slippery slope because even with the best intentions, some believe that this could be a real intrusion on family life. What do you say to folks that say, listen, the government shouldn't be here, not on my family farm?
Well, these rules actually do not affect the family farms. These rules are meant for kids that are employed on farms by other employers. So there has to be an employer-employee relationship in order for these rules to apply. Family farms, they're going to be untouched. Children will still be able to do any type of work at any time, at any age on their parents' farm.
Interesting. So now one farm worker who's now a college student, Rosie Blinson, was telling the Daily Caller that her main concern is that 4-H clubs and FFA projects would not be the same because under this restriction, they would not get the safety training and certification as part of these programs that are really popular in so many states. What would you say to someone like Rosie who has those concerns?
Well, going back to, as I had mentioned, there has to be an employer-employee relationship. Children would still be able to participate in 4-H and FFA. They'll still be able to do things like raise animals. It's just really concerning and regulating when it comes to children being employed on a farm.
Norma Flores Lopez, nice to have you today. Thank you so much for that perspective. Now we're going to move on to Senator Moran, who again has introduced some legislation here to stop the Labor Department from implementing this regulation. Some interesting points that Norma brought up, Senator, says it doesn't really affect kids on your family farm and that some of these programs would still happen. So what's your issue with this regulation proposal?
Norma and I certainly disagree about the consequences of this regulation, these proposed regulations. And I would tell you that while you introduced me as someone who's introduced legislation, that's true. But we've been trying to engage the Department of Labor for a long time to have a conversation with me and others. I've invited the Secretary to have a sit down and have a conversation about how life really works on farms across the country. In Kansas and across the nation, farming is a family opportunity. It's the way we're organized. It's the norm. And while Norma indicates that it doesn't affect family members, that's simply not the case. The Department of Labor has said that we're going to narrow the exemption for for kids who are working on their own family's farms. And then because of kind of the pressure that we put on, they said, well, we're going to take a step back and repropose that rule. But those issues are still out there. And so the department is interested, at least their initial regulations indicate they want to regulate the relationship between a parent and their child. And also you need to know that many family farming operations are with uncles and aunts, grandparents. It's a neighboring farmer. It's a way of life. And who more than parents are interested in their own kids' safety? And when you talk about 4-H and FFA, I don't have any doubt that this regulation doesn't ban 4-H and FFA. But those are the programs that we are currently using to educate young people, to get the training necessary to allow them to work on farms. And we're replacing that with the Department of Labor. 4-H and FFA know a lot more about family farming operations than the U.S. Department of Labor.
Now, we reached out to the Labor Department to get a little bit more information on that. We're awaiting some of their responses to our questions. What do you think the real intent here is, Senator? Because it seems like you have some doubts. What we know, at least superficially, is that this is just about keeping our children safe. But you seem to have a doubt on that. What do you think is the real intention here?
Well, only with one exception do I think it's something other than trying to keep our children safe. I think it's, you know, people have sat down and said, what can we do to make children safer? And this was the solution. My point is, this is not the solution. We need to perhaps strengthen local high school agricultural programs. And incidentally, the studies indicate, you can find studies, I suppose, to support whatever position you want, but even the study that Norma mentioned covered a wider array. People over 21 were included in that study. People who had committed suicide were included in the deaths. Individuals that were harmed in recreational activities, not in employment setting, are included. So
sure.
in my view, those numbers don't indicate the magnitude of the problem. We want every child to be safe. And again, my point is, who better than the local VOAG instructor, the 4-H leader, and especially mom and dad to help make those decisions? And if we don't teach kids about safety now and give them some experience, say at age 15, when they're under these rules, then eligible to come to work a few years later, they will not have had the experiences necessary to grow into the job. The average age of a farmer in the United States is nearly 60.
Point well taken, Senator.
We're losing our opportunity.
We look forward to having you back on to talk more about it. Again, it's proposed regulation at this time. We found data on injuries and deaths for children only go back to the early 1990s. So you're right in pointing out there's some challenges to the context for some of the statistics that are being used. So we look forward to having you back to talk more about this, Senator. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's important.